Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I've got a full tank review for you on this, the Type 63. This is the first ever Tier 8 Japanese premium heavy tank, and it is the first of what will be a new line of Japanese tech tree tanks with a brand new mechanic, and that is, if you wait slightly longer, your gun gets more accurate. That makes today's review quite exciting because not only am I judging the Type 63, you're kind of getting my opinion of what the new mechanics for the Japanese tech tree tanks could possibly bring to the game. So before we jump into the gameplay and I show you what this accuracy improvement feels like, let's see if this thing has any good statistics. But just before that, I want to clarify that in Wargaming's description of the vehicle, they suggested that it would have an oscillating, isolated central armament component at the rear of which the autoloader was located. And I guess that's going to be here, right? Well, unfortunately, no autoloader for this tank. So as with all new mechanics in World of Tanks, it's quite tricky to decide what to compare a new vehicle to. I've decided that it's quite similar to the AMX M4 Liberté, the Emil 1951, and a hull-down monster of a tank, the Tornvang. So immediately we notice that the Type 63 has a 105mm caliber gun with a lowly alpha damage of 320, although sometimes that doesn't hold back the Liberté. To add to this vehicle has an unimpressive damage per minute of 1,794, although all of these vehicles have quite low damage per minute for their tier, and it doesn't seem to hold them back on a ridgeline. The penetration of this vehicle is decent with its standard rounds at 230, and it gets nice shell velocity, which comes in handy for using the vehicle's amazing accuracy at decent distances. If you load gold with this vehicle, you can have 290mm of heat pen, but unfortunately, you'll lose a lot of that shell velocity, dipping down to 950, and I feel that the gold rounds on this vehicle will be way worse than, for example, that on a Tornvang that has 297 of APCR and 1,450 meters a second shell velocity. The gun handling of this vehicle is really nice. 2 seconds aim time best in this comparison. And this is the interesting mechanic. Its base accuracy before the cooldown is 0.38, and that is still better than the Emil 1951 and the Tornvang, although slightly worse than the Liberté. However, if you go from waiting from 10.7 seconds, which is how long it takes to reload the shell, and then you wait for an additional 3.3 seconds for its cooldown delay to run out, which is 14 seconds from when you fired a shot, then your accuracy will improve from 0.38 down to 0.28, making this thing have the best accuracy on any heavy tank in the game. And not even by a small margin. The other tank that has the best accuracy is the Tiger II at 0.31, so 0.28 is more like legendary tank destroyer accuracy, like you would get on a Grilla or an STRV-103B after you take the field mod. However, keep in mind, to be able to achieve this amazing accuracy, you will only have 1,371 damage per minute. But still, with the choice to fire before the cooldown delay has finished with 0.38 accuracy, it makes this thing very flexible on a ridgeline as to whether it's actually worth and you have those extra 3 seconds to hold on to the shell to achieve pinpoint precision. In addition to this vehicle's awesome aim time, the dispersion values on this vehicle are not bad at all, meaning that you probably could get away with dropping the vert stabs on this tank and investing into other areas if you're so inclined. Now let's talk about the tank's main feature, and that is that it has 14 degrees of gun depression, or actually, this is kind of a bug from Tanks GG. The vehicle actually has 12 degrees of gun depression, and I'll show you why Tanks GG is bugging out now. That is because I think this is a bug in the current patch, but there is a tiny part of the vehicle where it can actually depress its gun by 10 degrees, and it can use its hydropneumatic suspension over the back, which would give this vehicle between about 13 and 14 degrees of gun depression. However, Wargaming have stated that this is a bug, and it's not intended, and it should be fixed in a micro patch, most likely before you're actually going to get your hands on this vehicle inside the large boxes. Nevertheless, with 12 degrees of gun depression, that makes this thing the joint best gun depression of any tank at tier 8, or should I say tier 8 heavy tank, along with the Emil 1951. However, I stress to add, this is not a raw 12 degrees of gun depression on the turret. It's actually going to be 8 degrees of native gun depression and then 4 degrees only over the front of the vehicle if you are using the hydropneumatic suspension that this vehicle has, which consequently means if you want to aim directly over the side of this tank that you're only going to have 8 degrees of gun depression. So that makes this vehicle much less flexible on a ridgeline than an Emil or an Emil 1951, As all of you out there who have experienced what the hydropneumatic suspension feels like in World of Tanks with the rocking, it can get rather annoying when your opponents are moving from left to right and you don't want to have to turn your hull along with them to get that full 12 degrees of gun depression over the front. Nevertheless, it still makes this thing a remarkably reliable and flexible ridgeline tank. So now let's look at the mobility of the vehicle. 40 forwards, nothing special. 15 backwards, nothing special. But the power to weight on this tank is an excellent 16.5. Add to that and the best ground resistances in this comparison, apart from on soft terrain, and that makes this thing a rather fast tank. Add to this best-in-class tank traverse speeds, and this vehicle it does feel a bit more like a slower medium rather than a traditional heavy, which helps for when you want to be able to get into position quickly to contest where this tank wants to be, aka on a ridgeline. So now let's look at the armor on this vehicle. 80 at the front, worst in this comparison. 55 on the side, that's not good news. However, 175 on the front of the turret and 120 on the side. Now that's still the worst in this comparison. However, as I can show you, the turret on this tank is very well angled. This means that even if you're not using your gun depression, you still have about 290 millimeters of effective turret armor against armor piercing rounds. And even if your opponents have 290 heat, they're going to need 330 for high explosive anti-tank to be able to get through you. Now the tank does have some issues. We can see the ring around the gun here. And also, as soon as you turn your turret to the side, it does become exceedingly poor against decent pen and even worse against armor piercing rounds. They're only going to need about 200 millimeters to go through from this angle. Furthermore, considering how long this turret is, it does become one of the easiest things for people to pen from the side. So what this means is that if you play the Type 63, you want to do everything that you can to keep your turret facing the direction of the fire, because as soon as you don't, this thing's going to feel more like an M454 or a Rinoceronte or an M5Y. It's an incredibly frustrating tank if you're getting engaged from multiple angles. Considering that this tank is all about that gun depression, where you usually want to crest a ridge to try and focus somebody who's below you, you do end up exposing a mighty amount of your turret to everyone else in all parts of the map. Now, when it comes to the hull armor of this tank, it's really bad. 120 millimeters of armor on the lower plate, 130, 140 on the upper plate. Even if you do use the vehicle's full hydropneumatic suspension, the upper hull only barely becomes a ricochet for any kind of tank that's going to deal with this. And as soon as your opponents fire heat, the whole of the hull, even when it's angled like this, is a penetration. This is a very frustrating tank to play anywhere apart from on a ridgeline. And when you side scrape as well, the tank is horrendous because it has this angled frontal hull that from the side that doesn't really achieve anything anyway from the front. This thing, it's all about the turret. It kind of feels like an Emil within that regard, but I'd say that this thing is huge with regards to its hull compared to an Emil, so it makes it much harder to try and hide than the Swedish auto-loading heavies. To add to this, the vehicle has an unimpressive 1,400 hit points, okay view range at 380, which means that you will never need coated optics, and as with all heavies, mediocre camo rating, so you're going to get spotted from everywhere on the ridge. Crew-wise, this vehicle has 4 members, a commander, a gunner, a driver, and a radio operator. That's right, there's no loader in this vehicle, I guess because it was intended to have an auto-loader that Wargaming haven't actually implemented on the tank. Accordingly, the commander is the loader, and so I would thoroughly recommend that you get a 0-skill commander for this tank, because there's a lot of pressure on this commander. He'll want to have brothers-in-arms, recon, repairs, as well as hopefully having intuition so you can switch out the rounds depending on your target, and that's without having things like Eagle Eye, Safe Stowage, Adrenaline Rush, or Firefighting on this vehicle. So while you could take your crew from a Type 4 or Type 5 Heavy, for example, the commander is not optimal, and I would actually recommend retraining an entire crew for this tank so that you can be prepared for the entire Japanese heavy tank branch. For the gunner, I'd recommend you get yourself Brothers-in-Arms followed by Repairs, Snapshot to improve the dispersion, Deadeye, followed up with things like Designated Target and Firefighting. On your driver, you want to take Brothers-in-Arms, Repairs, and then things like Smooth Ride if you're not taking vert stabs especially, off-road driving to improve the vehicle's poor performance on soft terrain, and everything else is a luxury. The radio operator, super simple on this tank, doesn't need to be 0 skill, because all they do is Brothers-in-Arms, Repairs, Situational Awareness, and then Firefighting, possibly Concealment as a min-max. Equipment-wise, I feel that this vehicle needs a turbo to be able to contest ridge lines. Its 40 km/h top speed limit is not bad, but this tank is so horrible with its hull armor that I want to always take a turbo on this tank to try and rush into a position where I can go hull down. There's only certain situations where I'd want to drop this turbo to use a durability device when I'm on, say, Himmelsdorf or Ensk, where there's no opportunity to go hull down, and I'm going to have to expose my hull and just grit my teeth and bear the hit point loss to make any kind of shots. In addition to this, I'll take a gun rammer and vents on this vehicle to maximize the tank's firepower. Field mods wise, this vehicle is really simple. You want to take all-terrain suspension to improve the vehicle's ground resistances so it can get into position faster. Then I'd recommend improving the accuracy of the vehicle, and I'd take the view range on top, which will mean that you'll never need coated optics if you have a good crew and a premium consumable on this tank. And I'd like to highlight with this setup just how good the accuracy gets. It's getting down to 0.24 when it's fully cooled down. That is mad. But I think that's quite enough jibber jabber. Let's get stuck into the gameplay. So firstly, we're going to be rolling out on Muravanka against all tier 8 tanks. And apart from the artillery, I was pretty darn confident about what we were going to be able to achieve with this vehicle. So looks-wise, this kind of looks a little like, say, an AMX 5120, but just got squished down. It kind of never grew up. Short, stout thing, but kind of a bit of a joke compared to the Emil, where it still looks absolutely massive. Kind of, the hull looks to me a bit like an Italian heavy, a bit like I think it's the Progetto 66 at tier 9, right? Okay, so firstly, I want you to take a look at the reticle in the center of your screen. And that is because you'll see that there are actually 2 circles, but not initially. There's 1 circle, but wait for it. In a couple of seconds, there'll be another one. Well, actually, I fired too early. And look, there's the awful side turret there being punished by the Skoda T56. Also losing 462 hit points to the Kari at the beginning of the game. I'm kind of feeling a little bit awkward. Has the little circle started yet? It actually did, you'll see. And unfortunately, we miss the T34 in front of us. And oh dear, that's a pretty horrible start, right, boys and girls? I'm going to go for another one to see if we can be able to catch them. And I got lucky that I didn't die at the start of this game. And I think that was the wake-up call with this tank. To be fair, this was the first ever game I played in this tank, and I want to try and accelerate your learning process in it. So there you go. Do you see the second circle? I'll just pause it for a second, and I hopefully can zoom in. Actually, I can't zoom in. I'll pause it when I'm in the reticle, and there you go. So you see this? That is the vehicle's main accuracy, as if there was no cooldown, and that is the accuracy after the cooldown, which remember takes 14 seconds. So notice through all of my tank review today that the tank will reload in roughly about 9 to 10 seconds, and then the cooldown afterwards will be about 13 seconds. So what you're seeing here is what a tank with a decent turret when it's not exposing its side to its opponents is able to achieve. I threw away all of my HP, and I guess we'll just have to say I was min-maxing for Adrenaline Rush, right? Yeah, I was min-maxing for Adrenaline Rush. Had nothing to do with me not realizing just how awful this tank's side profile was. But look at this now. Look at this beautiful accuracy. Will we be able to hit the shot here on the 252U? Not quite. And that cheeky 252U is realizing, hey, I can't pen this thing. I'm going to fire HE. And it's a fair play by him. He's managed to whittle down my 130 hit points down to 92 now. I'm looking for the shot on top of the cupola. I don't quite manage to make it. And what I'm doing wrong there is you'll notice that I've actually got my hull slightly side on. And that means that I'm not getting my full hydropneumatic suspension in this vehicle. It's really annoying in this tank. It's not like an Emil or an Emil 1951 where you have a pure 12 degrees of gun depression. What you have to do is you have to turn your hull to the side so that, well, not to the side, but so it's directly facing your opponents to be able to get the maximum 12 degrees of gun depression this tank has, because it's got 8 native and 4 degrees of hydropneumatic suspension. So unless, as you can see now that I'm starting to turn my hull directly to my opponents, you're not going to get that full gun depression. So if you do manage to get this vehicle from the boxes or sometime in the future and you're watching this review in 2024, if Wargaming decide to ever sell this thing, unlike the BZ-176, but that was a completely different example of it being overpowered, make sure you always keep your hull directly facing towards your opponents. Otherwise, you just get mediocre gun depression in this tank and you're going to wonder why you're even playing it in the first place. So let's talk about this mechanic of the circle. In this kind of a situation, it doesn't really make too much difference because I'm not getting to fire on reload. Later on in this review, you're going to see that you actually kind of have to make a decision. Do I fire now and keep my damage per minute at like 1,800 base? Or do I wait for a little bit longer to have that better 0.1 accuracy to make sure that I absolutely hit this shot. It is a very interesting mechanic, and it's a decision that you're going to have to make as a player. Is it worth waiting for those extra 2 to 3 seconds after cruise skills, and you're using a rammer on this vehicle, for the gun to cool down and you to have the superior accuracy? Now, I'd also like to talk about Wargaming's implementation of this feature right now. I think they've done it in a pretty good way. I like the double circle, and for me it makes sense. I would like to say that I think it would have been nice if Wargaming had had an extra counter for when the cooldown was going to happen. You can't actually see in a replay, but when you play it live, you will see the reload on your screen. But after you've finished reloading, there's no indication of how much longer you exactly have to wait for the gun to get accurate. And that can be a little bit frustrating. I'll be honest, it can be a little bit frustrating to have to sit there and kind of wonder, oh, how many more seconds do I have to wait? And it's about 3 seconds. It's about 3 seconds, even with a gun rammer on this vehicle extra, that you have to wait for it to get fully accurate. But then it becomes like a game of reactions, where you have to wait for roughly those 3 seconds, unless you count them in your head, and then you click, right? I would have liked to have seen Wargaming implement it with some sound. I would have liked to have seen Wargaming implement it with an extra timer, but I can also understand that they don't want to confuse the users around the reload and make them think that they have to wait an extra 3 seconds to fire. But I think that that's treating their players like they're idiots, to be honest with you. And I think that they could have easily, and it's a great opportunity for some UI awesomeness, they could have had a counter that then, just like with the Italian auto reloaders, it reloads, but then with the Italian auto reloading heavies, with that kind of compensation mechanic where if you fire early, they could have made it so that you had the beep and then like just a little extra one to let you know when full accuracy has been achieved. Interestingly enough, the accuracy doesn't just switch. You will actually probably have to wait an extra half a second or second, depending on what your aim time is, to be able to get the for the reticle to be fully aimed. Because what is effectively happening is the accuracy of your tank is switching from 0.38 to 0.28 base. But remember, the way that accuracy works in World of Tanks is that to achieve your full accuracy, it's all about the aim time of your vehicle. So after like 10 seconds, after you've fully reloaded, you'll have your 0.38, and then 3 seconds later, when you have your 0.28 base, then the reticle will slowly move in. So you'll actually have to probably wait for an extra half a second or second to have that absolute maximum accuracy. And it's not like you can just wait and then be able to fire when it immediately happens, which is probably what Wargaming were thinking. So I really liked this game. This was a really good example of how tight you can play in the Type 63. I wasted all of my hit points early in this tank, as you saw, but look what happens when you play controlled in this tank on a ridgeline. You really give tier 8 tanks not too much opportunity. It's only really the tier 9s and the tier 10s that can truly contest this thing's turret. So as long as you're calm, controlled, and measured on a ridge, and you just wait for your opportunities, this thing is an absolute nightmare for the opponents to deal with great accuracy. Okay, so now we're rolling out on mines, and this time we're playing against tier 9 opponents. So there's going to be a little bit more penetration that we're going to have to deal with, right? So on mines, I decided that I didn't want to have the turbo on this vehicle. It's a close quarters combat map within that regard. And even with a turbo, I don't think I would even be close to rushing up on top of the hill. So I want to just get forward, only expose my turret, and this is just beautiful. This is what this tank is designed for, and all kind of hold down vehicles are designed for. You just got to be careful, because remember, as soon as you aim at your opponent's hull, they are most likely going to be able to see your hull as well. And while there is that kind of gap between the hull and the turret, and it is an advantage because they can't be able to shoot through that part, you can also see now that the Moistion actually managed to catch a weak point on top of the vehicle there with a standard round. That part of the tank has got about like 250 millimeters of armor, so it was a little bit irritating that the Moistion's 50-50 shot did manage to catch it. Kind of makes you think that you should raise your gun a little bit after you fire in this vehicle, just to be able to hide that weak point if you feel that people are trying to shoot at it. Although it's quite a tricky bar to hit, and And as you can see, Wargaming have actually made it angled. They didn't make it flat right there for the eagle-eyed view, which is Wargaming basically suggesting that they didn't want it to be that much of a weak point. This is where this tank is really sick. You know, if I was playing in another heavy tank, I would be worried in this scenario that I wouldn't be able to hit the Moistion's cheeks. But you see there that I actually decided to fire before the full accuracy went into effect, because sometimes you just got to let the gun rip, right? And in this kind of a situation, I didn't have a chance to fully aim, well, and also I didn't have a chance to wait for the maximum accuracy of the vehicle. So it is a really novel mechanic, and I'm really looking forward especially to see what Wargaming are going to be doing with all of the new line of Japanese heavies with that regard. Especially with how long they decide to make the accuracy cooldown. On this vehicle, it looks like they've decided to make it roughly about, 3.3 seconds out of 10.7. So it looks like it is about a quarter, well, no, not quite a quarter, even about 40% extra of the reload time. I don't know, probably about a third of the reload time. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. About a third of the reload time, slightly more than a third. About 35% of what the reload time is to be able to get that improved accuracy. I wonder if that's what they're going to do with the new line of Japanese heavy tanks as well. Will it be that whatever their reloads are, that you have to aim for an extra 35% of, well, have to wait for an extra 35% of the reload to be able to get that better accuracy? And it's interesting because the amount that it increases your dispersion from 0.38 to the 0.28 is like roughly a quarter as well. Just better than a quarter on the entire vehicle. So you wait for an extra 35% of the duration, and you get an extra 25% accuracy. Is that worth it? Yes, in quite a few situations it is, because it's not like you have to sit still to be able to gain that extra accuracy. You can be preparing that extra accuracy so you can deliver it just like that. And from this position, this tank just feels absolutely awesome. And while the damage per minute is definitely not great, 320 alpha is nothing special, this thing ends up feeling, the best way for me to describe it is, you know, the T832 inside World of Tanks, how it takes the T32's gun and it loses DPM, but it just gains its accuracy. That's kind of what this thing feels like as well. Oh man, not so good there with the hydropneumatic suspension. Oh, the vehicle bucked up there over the ridgeline. That was really unfortunate. But I feel that this tank, with the extra aim time, well, the extra weighting, the extra reload to be able to gain the accuracy, kind of feels like the T832 versus the T32. You can kind of fire this thing in T32 mode where you have the better DPM, or you can fire in T832 mode where you have the better accuracy. But you have the flexibility to choose, which is a definitive advantage on the tank. And it means that we can go and club some fairly efficient results in a sub 5-minute game. So I had so many of these decent games when I managed to get on Muravanka, where you have lots of opportunities for gun depression. And then when we got on Mines, where we get above our opponents, we managed to finish #1 on damage and #1 on experience. And as this is a premium tank, it makes good credits with it. Had so many of these kind of games where we did really well. However, if I was to only show you these, I wouldn't be painting the full picture. So now we're rolling out on Overlord, and we are in a tier 10 matchup. And all of you know how many times your tier 8 heavy tanks get against tier 10s. Well, now it's a completely different kind of scenario, right? For our opponents to be able to go through our turret, they need about 300 armor-piercing pen, and they need about 330 high-explosive anti-tank pen because of the lack of normalization. And when you start to play against tier 9 and tier 10 tanks, there's a lot more vehicles that do have that kind of firepower. Oof, I love that accuracy. I love that gun handling as well. On a ridgeline, this thing, I'd say it is the master of hull down now. I'd say it's better than the Emil within that regard, because the Emil, its gun handling and its gold pen especially is just very disappointing compared to this tank. And you'll see that we're hitting clutch shots on the CS63 even over the ridgeline like that. So far, so good for this vehicle. But there's only so much you can really do in a scenario like this, because you just got to wait for your opponents to push. And like, aha, we got you ST1. We're going to reload a heat round. We're going to be able to put in a shell. And I was feeling chipper. good start to this game. We've got 1,000 combined. We're dealing damage to tier 9 and tier 10 tanks. Looking good, all looking rosy so far, right? So I'm just hoping that this ST1 is going to come around the corner. You see that we've got the maximum accuracy on this vehicle now. The artillery narrowly misses the ST1, and I'm just hoping, come on buddy, come around the corner. This is the most accurate heavy tank in the game. I should easily be able to hit your weak points, right? But oh dear, he's got a little bit of a CC-67 friend that we're going to have to deal with. And the natural nemesis of the all-hull down tanks, aka the artillery, starts. Well, unfortunately we can see that even with our gold loaded on this tank of 290, it's still not guaranteed to be able to go through the weak points of the ST1. And now that I've used my med kit, that does make me quite vulnerable to taking damage. And as you're going to see, our gold fails once again to be able to go through the ST1's cheeks, and he puts a heat round right through my turret front. Because remember what I said, you need like 320, 330 millimeters of heat pen to go through this thing from the front, even when it's hull down. And tanks like the ST1 and tier 10s have them. And now my commander is gone. And of course, what does my commander do on this tank? My commander is the loader as well. So, oh dear, when everything seems to go wrong in this vehicle, I can tell you it really does. And then you're left feeling, well, what is kind of the point of this tank? It doesn't have the alpha damage that a Tornvang has. It doesn't have the gold pen that a Tornvang has. It's got less pen, and it also doesn't have the normalization you'd get from the APCR or the shell velocity. It's turret armor. It's fallible. You've got poor damage per minute. You do have good accuracy if you're willing to take the poor damage per minute and make it absolutely horrendous. And while you do have 12 degrees of gun depression, you have to use an awkward hydropneumatic suspension to be able to achieve it. If I was playing the Emil, I would have 360 alpha damage, and I would have a 3-round autoloader, which makes it feel as if it's immensely punishing to its opponents if it does manage to get into that position where it gets to unload, right? One thing I'd like to highlight in this entire review is that when you're playing a tank, it's all about kind of like the risk reward, right? There are some tanks in the game, like the FV405, that have unlimited kind of firepower potential to abuse their opponents, right? And so you have no armor, but you're willing to take a hit because you might be able to remove them in a single shot. However, the issue with this vehicle is that even the 290 pen just isn't really doing anything to this ST1 right now, and I just don't have the firepower. My commander is back in the game, which is great. I was hoping that I could pen an AP round through there on the side, and I do. I don't want to just be constantly firing gold in this tank review. I want to show you what the vehicle is going to be like when you're not just spamming gold. Did you see how annoying the reticle was there, bouncing up and down when you're using the hydropneumatic suspension? And I'm just thanking my lucky stars that this ST1 just went and sat in front of me and allowed me to farm them. Because that's what this tank kind of does. It's a fantastic tank for sitting on a ridgeline and waiting for people to do stupid things to farm them. But oh man, that hydropneumatic suspension annoyed me there. The fact that I couldn't have the full 12 degrees of gun depression, the reticle kind of bounces as you go forwards when you're reaching the extent of your gun depression. Everyone who's played a tank with a hydropneumatic suspension will know just how frustrating this can be. And while this vehicle in theory is kind of the god of the ridgeline, and it does have the potential to achieve 12 degrees of gun depression, boy does it feel awkward while it is trying to do so. And when you miss, you feel like I'm playing the most accurate heavy. I've got to try and be able to hit all of these shots, right? And when you can't play with immunity on a ridgeline, you just have to kind of bait your opponents into shooting before you go up, right? And the game is just, there's nothing I can do to try and like catch up into it. We're losing the beach. We've got a CS-63 above that I'm trying to harass. I'm trying to find shots here on the ST1. Unable to do so. The gun handling on this vehicle, decent. But again, if I can't expose my turret like I could do in one of the Swedish heavy tanks, and the missed shot on the CS-63 there, I guess I'm getting desperate in this game But of course, now with the Scorpion behind us, who, to be fair, I didn't know about at the time. That was some tunnel vision. The Scorpion behind me, the ST1 there, everyone, and 268. And while, look, I'm not saying that I played perfectly in this game. I want to just highlight that this tank, it's not perfect on a ridgeline. It is fallible, especially when you get into these tier 9 and tier 10 matchups. And then honestly, it's been a frustrating kind of static, sit in one position kind of tank and just pray that your opponents suck. So let's look at one more example of this. We've managed to get our Type 63 onto a ridgeline. It took me a long time to be able to get here because I'll be honest, I was trying to look pretty for a not me but I was that's impossible, right? But I was trying to get a really nice screenshot that you'll probably have clicked on to be able to get to this review. But this is, I've almost, because I've got there a little late, I've almost found myself in the perfect scenario where we're getting to engage at long range against the enemy tanks. And in this kind of a situation, it's beautiful. And this position that I'm using here is a position that I've used quite a few times to be able to, well, not a few times to 3-mark tanks, but I managed to 3-mark my Iron Arnie in this position. It's wonderful for anything that has 10 degrees of gun depression, and when like this you have more, then it's great. But what I want to highlight here is I decided to wait to get the extra accuracy, and then unfortunately the Alpine Tiger went forwards and backwards, which made it so that I ended up missing. And then I hit the shell that I don't fully aim or like use the enhanced accuracy against the Emil. But now, do I fire now or do I wait? Do I wait? Of course I wait because there's no opportunity, and then you'll see now we get that maximum 0.28 base accuracy that we can improve to like 0.25 or 0.24. And oh man, that regard, this thing feels great. So I'm sure there will be a lot of you out there who love just sitting in one position and just sniping enemy tanks. And for all of you out there, this thing is great within that regard. It is a wonderful vehicle for dominating a ridgeline, and unlike a lot of heavies, it does exceptionally well at catching its opponents at decent distances. And just like that, even though I was slow into position in this game, now we're up to 1,600 damage. Again, I was feeling really chip. I think this is going to go really well, right? Unfortunately, the artillery begins. And artillery will love to focus this thing with its rather poor upper deck armor and large size. And oh dear, SU clubs me right through, I guess, the hull there, actually, as you can see. Right through the side of the hull, because I guess I'm overexposing myself. And I guess it's because this ELC even 90 is finding me. And again, I go up and... I go up to try and find a shot on the ELC even 90, and then I get hit once again by the SU-130 PM, who's like 320 heat pen, can easily be able to go through the front of this thing, even when I'm using my maximum gun depression, and I get hit by the RT again. And so this game was kind of like the perfect example of the Type 63. If you think it's going to be the hold down god, it's really not. It's lovely at playing an assisting role and sniping at decent distances and just dealing with one opponent that's right in front of you. But as soon as you have to poke up to try and find that shot using your gun depression, you seem to take miraculous shots from other areas of the map. And so this vehicle, it was hot and cold for me. Sometimes it felt like, wow, this is it. I'm loving this tank, dumping in shots with the most accurate heavy tank in the game. And then other times it felt like, yeah, boy, I wish I just had a little bit more firepower to actually make poking more worthwhile. And that's really the conclusion that I come to with the Type 63. Sure, it's great in those miraculous situations, but it just doesn't have the armor to expose itself liberally. And unlike its autoloader rival, the Emil 1951, which can dump out 1,000 damage within 6 seconds, against one tank, this thing is going to take more like an entire minute to be able to do that. And so, do I think that the Type 63 is going to be the new best heavy tank at tier 8? No, not even close. This one just lacks the firepower to be competitive when it's out of its, like its one-trick pony kind of ridgeline impact. However, does it present some interesting mechanics that do actually reward thoughtful gameplay? Yes, and I think this one also gives me hope for what the new Japanese Ridgeline heavy tanks could be like with their accurate guns if you're willing to pay the price. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments what you think about the Type 63. Do you think this thing looks like the best heavy tank in the game and you're gonna spend what you need to in the large boxes to be able to get it? Or do you think it looks like a mediocre tank that you are not going to bother with, even if you manage to get one? And make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay tuned, as I got another 2 tank reviews coming your way. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.